My name's Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, and I'd like to thank you for showing up for our final Curator Conversations of 2020 today. Today, we are going to be talking about being deployed for the holidays. And we have a lot of panel members on our talk today. So if you want to see who's speaking, so that way you can tell who's who and keep everybody separate and apart, if you go up to the right-hand corner of your Zoom box, you're going to see an option for speaker's view or gallery view. If you put it in speaker view, it will show all the presenters and it will highlight each presenter as they're speaking, so that way you can keep everybody separate and tell who's who. And also, if you have any questions for our presenters today, if you could please submit those via the chat function on your Zoom program, that would be awesome as well. And before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to say thank you to Ms. Jennifer Carlson and the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support and all of our free programming that we've been able to accomplish this year and moving forward into next year. We have a great slate of programming coming up next year, so be sure to keep tuning into our website and checking our events calendar and seeing all that great programming that we have coming up. And that is brought to you all by the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation. So thank you again for their continued support. And without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn this Curator Conversations over to Father Christmas, otherwise known in our staff as Kevin Hampton, who's our Curator of History. He's going to be taking us through today and bridging the conversations as we talk about being deployed for the holidays. Kevin?
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate it. I'll give it a few more years, and then maybe I can get the white to spread a bit more, and I can get that Father Christmas look going for you. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. If you haven't been to a Curator Conversation before, welcome. This is an opportunity for our staff to really have a fun discussion about history. You can see that we try and frame it with a theme. And so this theme this year is Deployed for the Holidays. And it's an opportunity really just to talk about history, because history isn't a passive experience. Studying history is very active. And the best way to do that is to share stories, because that's what history is. It's sharing stories. And that's what we do at the Veterans Museum. So we're glad you could join us today. Of course, today's discussion, Deployed for the Holidays. And when you think of the holidays at the time, most of the time during war, you think of that very cliche, the war will be over by Christmas. I think every conflict has always had an assessment of that sort, whether it was the Civil War or World War II. There was always about September, roughly July to September, people start making bets of whether the war will be over by Christmas or not. So outside of that experience, outside of looking at the tactical and the progression of the wars themselves, of how they can actually be completed by Christmas, if possible, is the reality of what the individuals that are fighting those wars or are just in the service, not even at a time of war, and experiencing the holidays away from home. We always, you look at those Christmas carols and they're talking about the most wonderful time of the year. And what is that like, though, if you can't be home for the holidays, as much as we'd all like to be? That said, I will say that with the snow this weekend, I don't know if any of my panelists will agree, but I think this was the first year that I truly understood what it meant to be, since I have no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. So with that, I'll start introducing our panelists. I want to make sure to introduce everybody, and I have a fun little icebreaker for everybody. So first and foremost, we've got a great panelist of staff participating in today's discussion. And I want to throw them off a little bit with my trivia here. So let's start with Luke Sprague, our oral historian. Luke, thank you for joining us. A question for you. Twinkle lights or non-twinkle lights?
Definitely twinkle lights.
Okay, all right. And we're also joined by Russ Horton, our reference and outreach archivist. And Russ, I got a question for you. Let's do gingerbread or sugar cookie?
Oh, sugar cookie, hands down.
Excellent, excellent. And we're also joined by Brittany Strobel, our processing archivist. Brittany, question for you. Tinsel tree or a regular green tree? Evergreen.
Evergreen tree.
Okay, all right, all right. Well, I haven't found many yet that like the tinsel tree. We'll have to see how this goes here. And Yvette, Yvette Pino, our traveling art curator. Yvette, question for you. If you want to unmute, there we go. Eggnog or hot chocolate?
Eggnog. Always eggnog.
With nothing in it, of course. Additional.
I had to think about that one. Well,
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I think I got everybody there on our panel list.
it's Eric's question.
What was that?
Oh, I didn't know if Eric got a question.
Eric's our introduction, but I'll ask him at the end. I've got
Okay.
one special one lined up for him at the end there. So he's gonna do our Q&A. So we'll go with that. So like I said at the beginning, we want to talk about the reality of service during the holidays, not just at time of war, but a lot of times we think of that in terms of military service, of what are those people experiencing at some of the darkest moments in human history. And a great way to start and frame this conversation, because there's always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel in most of these stories, but not all the stories. Not all the stories are happy, but not all of them are sad either. It's a human experience. And so we're going to show that spectrum today, I hope, and by looking at the traditions too while on deployment. But we'll start off with the story of Rhoda Ziesler. And Brittany, we've got, it falls at a right time to really, or feels like a right time to talk about this, because we just got off of commemorating the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and Rhoda's got a unique connection to that event, correct?
She really does. Rhoda was from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and after completing her training as a nurse, she ended up in the Army Nursing Corps and trained in Michigan and a little bit in, I think, Louisiana, but then ended up being deployed to Hawaii. Now, she wasn't at Pearl Harbor. She was at Schofield Barracks, which is about 20 miles inland and is next to Wheeler Field, which is the airfield out there. Now, Rhoda arrived in Hawaii on November 9, 1941, just shy of a month before Pearl Harbor happened. She spent her time writing letters to family saying, this is so different, this is so new, and it's such an adventure. And what do you want for Christmas? And I'll send you home a package. What does my cousin want for Christmas? What does my brother, everybody in my family, all my friends, what do you want from Hawaii for Christmas? And before Pearl happened, she had sent home her packages. And of course, people had sent packages to her so she could have a Merry Christmas all the way in Hawaii, no snow. And then on December 7th, 1941, Rhoda was at the hospital where she worked. She'd gone to Mass earlier that morning and then went to the hospital. And she was out back looking up at the sky, and there are these planes. And she thinks, well, what a funny training mission. They're so low and we can see the rising sun on these planes. And what an in-depth training mission. Only to find out hours later, when the first casualties rolled into the ward, that this was not training. This was real. This was happening, and this was horrible. And then a few weeks later, it's Christmas, and Rhoda loves Christmas. She was deeply religious. She went to religious services a lot. It was a big part of her life, and reconciling Christmas with what had just happened was a big moment for her. I don't know if you want to advance the slide at all. Outside of their living quarters after Pearl happened, they dug trenches for the nurses to go into should anything happen. There were raids, there were rumors. Everyone was very, very worried, rightfully so, after what happened at Pearl and after Wheeler Field was also attacked. And then if you want to advance a little bit more. This is her diary, and we're so lucky to have her diary. She kept it from the moment she got word that she was going to be sent overseas to Hawaii, and documented her whole journey. And this is her writing about her first Christmas Eve, really, really away from home and feeling so much closer to home by keeping traditions like putting lights on the Christmas tree, the decorations that reminded her of her mother, going to church. And really impactfully to me, she wrote on Christmas Eve, they were so pleased. We had our Christmas party, not all around on the floor, had beautiful decorations, many poinsettia and holly. Sorry, I'm losing my place. Holly berries, evergreens, etc. We all sat on the floor. Miss Merrill read The Night Before Christmas. And we had Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus. They passed out the gifts. I got some fancy soap. We each got a stocking with candy and nuts, and Colonel Canning gave a short address. I think he cried and thanked all of us for our cooperation and wished us a Merry Christmas in the future. Father Finnegan gave the blessing. Miss Mellon passed out Christmas cookies. So even in this very different world where something so horrific had happened, they still made a space to have a happy Merry Christmas.
Excellent. There's a lot of traditions just in that one account that you can see. The Christmas cookies, the decorations, the festivities of just really being around each other and with each other and taking a moment, even in this dark time, to just take a pause and reflect on what it means to be together. And that camaraderie, I think, is a theme that we'll see throughout our discussion today. Another aspect of holidays while on deployment is the fact that in many cases, you can go several years, several Christmases or several holiday seasons without actually being able to be home, or perhaps getting a chance to go home in between. So Russ, I think there's a good story you've got about a multi-year deployment that really kind of sums that up for us.
Yeah, I have a story about a man named Wilbur Burgett. He was a dairy farmer from southwestern Wisconsin, and he wrote letters home to his family several a week throughout his service. And he was drafted in February of 1941. He served through the end of 1945. So we have letters that cover 5 Christmases, 5 holiday seasons in which he was away from his family. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to see where he was, what he was doing, how he was feeling on each of those seasons through his letters. So that's what I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit right now. So as I said, Wilbur was drafted in February of 1941 before the U.S. entered the war. He was assigned to the 11th Cavalry Regiment, which was stationed out at Campbell, California. So his first Christmas, which kind of like Brittany just mentioned, happened very soon after the attack on Pearl Harbor, took place out in California. And he did feel the effects of it out there too, as you can see in the first quote from his letter written on Christmas Eve, 1941. They were not allowed to leave the base or have time off because there was a great fear still of the Japanese attacking the West Coast, or of sabotage taking place while soldiers were off guard. So I think that's an interesting thing to note. And then Wilbur also, in a letter to his parents, described in great detail the Christmas feast that they had at Camp Lockett, which it's getting close to lunchtime here. It's making me hungry just looking at it. Turkey and ham, potatoes, dressing, sweet potatoes, peas, asparagus, salad, olives, cranberry jelly, mince pie, fruitcake, nuts, and cookies and candy too. So, this is still new. He'd only been in the service for about 10 months. He knew that the war was going to get worse from here, but you can see that his spirits are still fairly high here in describing the feast that they had. So in the summer of 1942, the Army had come to the realization that horse-based cavalry was not going to work really well in World War II. So Wilbur left the 11th Cavalry and became part of a newly organized unit called the 92nd Armored Recon Battalion, which was part of the 12th Armored Division. And this took him out to the opposite coast, over to the east side near Camp Campbell, Kentucky. So this is where he spent his second Christmas in the service, Christmas 1942. And you can see a little bit his spirits start to descend just a bit here. And he talks about not going anywhere on Christmas Eve. We had sort of a Christmas party, sang a few songs, attended a religious service. He wasn't feeling quite as cheerful here in 1942. Moving on, the 92nd was reorganized into the 92nd Cavalry Recon Squadron, mechanized, and they moved out to Texas, Camp Barkley, Texas, by 1943. And Wilbur wrote a couple of letters home to his parents in the holidays that I pulled quotes from. He mentioned the decorations at the mess hall at Camp Barkley with mistletoe, crepe paper, tinsel, and he even mentioned a loudspeaker system in camp that was broadcasting Christmas carols. So this is maybe a little bit more descriptive and more emotional than the last year. Although you do see him starting to miss his parents. This is now the third Christmas that he's been away from his parents and his family. And he says, I suppose you had a nice Christmas last night. I was thinking about you all and wished I could have been there. But it's better not to think of it that way because there's nothing one can do about these things. Again, this is the third Christmas that he's been away from his family in the service. All right, big changes for him into 1944. In September of 1944, his unit deployed to Europe. And that's where censorship starts coming into play. So we are not certain exactly where he was in Christmas 1944. We can get a pretty good idea from where his unit was, but his letter is titled Somewhere in France. So in Christmas 1944, again, you can see him really missing his family. He writes, I hope that next year I'll be back. I sure don't want to spend another Christmas on foreign soil. He mentions going to a French home, about 30 soldiers, and singing Christmas carols. And the guys in his unit who had received gift boxes or treat boxes from home or from the Red Cross shared them. They had fruitcake and candy, and the French civilians also shared what little they had with the soldiers. So this is, again, Christmas 1944, his fourth Christmas in the service and away from his family. So moving into 1945, the war ends in Europe in the spring, the war ends in Japan in the summer, but Wilbur remains in Europe. In order for the Army to logistically be able to handle sending all of these men and women home, they came up with a point system, and men and women who reached a certain number of points were sent home. Now, points were based on the number of months in service, the number of months spent overseas, the number of campaigns served in, combat decorations, and children at home. And because Wilbur had not made it overseas until relatively late in the war, and because he did not have any children, it took him a long time to reach the required 80 points, which is why he was still in Europe in December of 1945. And he saw friends being sent home as hundreds of thousands of troops were sent home. Units were taken apart and consolidated, and he ended up moving into a different unit. Earlier in the summer of 45, he went to the 81st Cavalry Recon Squadron and spent 6 months with them. And then right in December, he was transferred to the 84th Infantry Division. And this comes into play a little bit because in this letter he wrote home to his parents on December 22nd of 45, he said basically that he's going to go visit his old friends in the 81st Cavalry Recon Squadron because he knew them better. He had spent a longer time with them and he wasn't as friendly with the 84th Infantry Division folks. So this letter he wrote December 22nd, 45, mentions that he's gonna get a Jeep and go visit his friends, and then closes the letter with, guess that's all for tonight, so we'll close. Love, Wilbur. Now at this point, he knew that he was going to be going home soon. I think he had a date of January 6th. So he was very close to returning to his parents. He had written to them about it. He was very, very excited and probably in really good spirits when he was driving to visit his old friends in the 81st Cavalry. Unfortunately, we know the end of the story here. And on December 23rd, the next day, when he hopped in the Jeep to drive up to visit his old friends, he was killed in a car accident. His Jeep was hit by a truck and he suffered severe burns and kidney lacerations, and he died on Christmas Eve, 1945. So his fifth Christmas away from home was also his last Christmas season. It's a really sad story. It is one of the kind of tragic stories, but it's also, I think, again, really interesting to be able to trace through his letters a lot of different topics. But for this presentation, just the way that he spent and saw Christmases away from his family.
Yeah, and that multiple Christmases, multiple holiday seasons. It's interesting. You can see too, though, that in each one there still is commonalities, and I think we saw that with with Rhoda's story as well, where you've got a feast component. There's some sort of decorations. There's some sort of carol singing or some sort of special festivity, and that's something that we want to talk about because this is a heartbreaking story, but there were moments of happiness in his life, and that's something to remember as we go. So let's go into those. Actually, if I can move the slide here, go into those different traditions, if you will, a little bit more, because like we talked about, there's going to be those commonalities, and really since the Civil War, you've got people trying to commemorate the day in a special way, so that there's an opportunity to make it a little bit different than the day before. So I'll start here with one of our stories from the Civil War. Because one thing you want to think about too, when you think about how do you decorate, how do you celebrate, how do you commemorate while in deployment, it also depends all on where you are. In this case, Charles Goodrich of Oakland, Wisconsin, was on guard duty. He was on picket duty during the Civil War in 1862. And it's a very important job because you're essentially the one that's meant to stop people from coming into camp. You're supposed to know where the enemy is. You're supposed to make sure that everyone's safe and protected. So it's a very important job. And to be assigned that on Christmas is probably a fairly demoralizing aspect, because you don't get to be back in the case of Civil War in the winter quarters, where there's nice log cabin that they've built, and they've got a fire and a chimney made out of barrels, which I always thought was a terrifying prospect because what happens when the chimney goes up. But either way, so you're out in the field, you're out in the elements, but even then there's ways to know that you can take some time and make a special effort. And in Charles's letters, which we have in the collection, this one I don't believe we do have in the collection. It's actually in a private collection elsewhere. But he writes home on Christmas in 1862. It's now the season of the holidays, and I will endeavor to give you some idea of how I spent it. 4 of us Oakland boys. And I find I need to go back and research these individuals themselves to see what their stories are. But they're all from Jefferson County, Wisconsin. And that's another similarity that you're going to see, is that people are spending time together, sometimes with those from home if they can, but or those overseas or undeployed from home, or those that are just complete strangers. But anyway, we went out prepared to have a little something extra for a Christmas dinner. Alex and Horton brought 2 cans of oysters. We got some potatoes, a rarity, took out some flour, and got a woman to bake us some biscuits. So that notwithstanding, we were soldiers in the enemy's country, outdoors on picket, we had almost a glorious Christmas. And you take that moment, that the fact that only 2 cans of oysters, and the fact that they got to have actual biscuits for the first time in a while instead of hardtack. He actually builds on that a bit more in his second letter to his wife a few weeks later, who, when she had asked, so tell me a little bit more about this Christmas dinner, and was it any good? You're comparing what you can have at home versus what you can have in the field. And this is a wonderful perspective from his letter here. You asked me about my Christmas dinner. Was it good? It was good. Butter we had none. I have not tasted it for a long time. We had a little milk to put in our oysters. The biscuits were good. Perhaps you would not call them so, but they were plenty good enough for a soldier. They were made by a woman nearby where we were posted. They were made of flour, water, and salt. I guess a little soda, but no buttermilk or sour milk, and no shortening. So obviously, by home standards, that's not exactly the greatest feast in the world. But he does later go on in that letter to talk about how for a soldier, though, it was good enough. Actually says that right there in that quote. But the next part of his first letter home, when he says that they had almost a glorious Christmas, he says almost a glorious Christmas because then he goes on to describe the weather that night. And apparently it was a torrential rain storm. And so he spent the night just completely soaked. outdoors, except he said if the weather had lasted throughout the way that it had during the day, which was nice and sunny, it truly would have been a glorious Christmas. Now, meals at the time while on deployment are quite unique. And Luke, we've got a great story here of someone who was also in trying to cope with their elements and cope with their surroundings. And would you mind telling us the story of Paul?
Yeah, Paul's got a unique story. He's from Wautoma, Wisconsin, and Plainville, Wisconsin, and he was a navigator on a B-24 during World War II. And he was on his 20th mission over the river in the Po River Valley, and their aircraft got shot down on mission 20. And Paul hid in the bushes along with one of the co-pilots, and eventually he decided he was going to turn himself into the Germans, who were at that point occupying northern Germany. And he ended up being placed in an Italian jail, and but it's run by the Germans. The Germans come back and forth and get him. And he has an interesting story to tell about his Christmas Eve experience with the Germans in Italy and Christmas Eve. One thing also to place this in context, after he left, after Italy, the Germans would then ship him off to another prisoner of war camp in Germany. And by the end of the war, he would end up having to recover and put on weight before he could return stateside because he had lost so much weight in the prisoner of war camp. Another thing to keep in mind is immediately after the audio that we're going to be playing here, the next day, he's put in a room with a group of prisoners, and some of them would be executed that day. Some of them would live on, and Paul, of course, would survive. So if you could, go ahead and start the audio here, please.
So that was one interesting part of our time there. The other one came Christmas Eve, and this Italian jail was next to it. Wasn't even a block away from a German guardhouse, and I suppose that's why the Germans used it for their prisoners there too. But Christmas Eve, about dinner time, when normally one of the German soldiers would come over, the Germans basically they took care of us. They brought our meals over, and so German non-com came over and he had Christmas dinner in a canteen. They used the big canteen cup and everything, and it was what would be typical in America, I suppose, coming from Germany originally. Turkey and stuffing and cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes and gravy and the whole thing kind of mixed together. But he said his commanding officer had asked him to wish us a very Merry Christmas, and then he left. This was, I guess, about 6, and around 7 he came back again. And this time he had a package maybe 10 inches long and 3-4 inches wide and 1 inch high in a light blue paper wrapped, tied with a kind of a ribbon, and had some foil icicles over it. And he had a tallow candle about 6 inches high, and he gave me the package. It turned out to be cookies, and the tallow candle, and said his commanding officer had asked him again to wish me a Merry Christmas and asked me to light the candle before the non-com left. So we put the candle in the corner of the floor and lighted it, and I opened the package of cookies and shared them with the political prisoners, and our sergeant left. About an hour more, about 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve, he came back again, and this time he had a South African with him who was acting as an interpreter and also was a gopher for the commanding officer. And he did the talking this time. He said the sergeant had decided he wanted to invite Jim and me to their Christmas party. And he said that we should come, but if we were going to talk English, we should keep our voices down, because the sergeant had his neck out on us to invite us to their Christmas party.
So did you go?
So we went, and they had a concertina, and they had they had cigars, and they had cookies and cake and wine and brandy and all kinds of goodies, Christmas candy. And we spent about 2 hours, I guess, over there, and they sang Christmas carols and played them with the concertina. And one young soldier motioned for me to come away from the rest and way over in the corner. And he said, tomorrow they're sending me to the front. And he said, I just want you to know that as soon as I get to the front, I'm putting my hands up. I don't want any more of this war. I had enough. So about 10 o'clock, when our sergeant said time to go home, another gopher came down from up overhead somewhere, and we tried very carefully not to make enough noise or to talk English or anything like that. This fellow came down just as we were leaving, said, my commanding officer had asked me to wish you a very Merry Christmas. So apparently the old man knew this was going on, even though he was supposedly out of the loop. Out of the loop, right.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting to listen to it in its total and to contrast it with the next morning where he goes, the Germans then take him out again and he spends time with them, and then they execute a number of the prisoners that are non-related. And so interesting story.
Very cool. Well, we know that feasts don't always just happen in the field. In some cases, there are, and actually most cases, there are, of course, feasts that happen on garrison duty. And we happen to have a very fun, I would say, photo coming up here. That, Luke, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit background of your experiences, because if I do say so, this is quite a dashing photo.
Yeah. So this is me, and yeah, in my dress blues, and I'm at this point, this is 1995, December 1995, Camp Casey, Republic of Korea. One of the traditions in the Army during the holidays, in particular during Christmas and during Thanksgiving, is the officers serve the enlisted. And so it's a little bit of a role reversal. And I'm, of course, in my dress blues here, and I've got my French Froger 2ID, and that's the cordon on there. And the uniform's not as beautiful as it should be. It's a little less than I would hope, but that's what we're doing there. And then, of course, both of those meals, those holiday meals for the Army in particular, are big meals, regardless if you're in garrison, in this case, or you're in the field. So there's always an attempt to make it something special, no matter where you are. And it's funny, one of my peers here, a vet who's also an Army veteran, mentioned ice sculptures. And it turns out we actually had an ice sculpture here, and I'll let her take it from here.
Oh, thanks, Luke. I actually want to know about your ice sculpture there. I was an Army cook, so tell me about your ice sculpture.
So somewhere in the picture, back in the Korea picture, to the left or the right, there is in fact an ice sculpture there. And the reason why, even though we were in garrison, was the fact that we were just blown away. We're like, how did they get this thing here? How was it created? And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it, but I do specifically remember the ice sculpture.
I think it's right behind you. I can sort of see the shimmer of the block down on yeah, right below Kevin.
Right
Right
here.
below the elbow. Yep.
Yeah.
On the cart.
Oh yeah, right there.
They would have wheeled it in. Yeah.
Yeah. So good times.
Yeah.
Now,
So go ahead.
Yvette, yours is a little unique because you designed it, right?
Well, I didn't. I mean, it's the air assault wings from. I was
Right.
with 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, and I was on the culinary arts team. So I was an Army cook, and Luke is correct. We all prep the officers for their time serving the enlisted. So prior to the meal service, we would show the officers how to serve and handle themselves on the line correctly. And there is a role reversal where you would usually make the officers form up and get their pre-inspection, just like we have to do and what's required of us every day before we start prepping for meals. So it's a nice exchange, a wonderful tradition. And this ice sculpture, while I was on the culinary arts team, we were able to study ice sculpting and then produce them for different big events on post. So they would bring giant ice blocks to this warehouse, and we would all get a chainsaw, and we would go out and carve the big blocks of ice. I loved ice sculpting. I wanted to do more of it. This one is an okay example, but you literally learn for a day, and then you get your chainsaw and you have to create this three-dimensional object. And there's a lot of tricks to keep it from fogging up, is what we call it. I have another picture where you can see the whited out part of the wing because I carved incorrectly and it fogged up. So you don't have that crystal clear air salt wing. So this is inside the big, there's a brand new, well, it was brand new in 04 convention center in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which is just outside of Fort Campbell. And this is where the big military ball was. We loaded this sculpture inside, and then there's another one that was outside with Christmas lights glowing on it. So I did not attend the ball, but that is the install picture prior to the big Christmas ball.
I enjoy the fact that there was a little bit of role reversal where you got to inspect the officers. I bet there was a little bit of joy in that job.
Well, it's interesting because as I was finding these pictures, I realized I got promoted a week before Christmas. So I got promoted to sergeant the week before that happened, which meant that I was the one that had to inspect the officers. So it was one of my first inspections that I had to do. And I will admit, I always got tripped up on my right faces and was not as clean of an inspector as I should have been. But yes, it was interesting. And a little side note on the air assault wings, our culinary arts instructors were retired sergeant majors. So retired cooks, Mr. Borens was in World War II and Korea, and our other instructor was also an older gentleman. And they also taught the culinary arts program at the local community college. So the only pattern he had for air assault wings, when I told him I wanted to do air assault wings, he pulled out a pattern that's called Kissing Doves, which is a very common ice sculpture for weddings, because he would cater a lot of local weddings. So he gave me the Kissing Doves pattern to put on the ice, and then I had to modify it to be the air assault wings. So it was, I remember shaking my head looking at him like, what do you want me to do with this Kissing Doves pattern? But it worked. It did. It worked really well.
It looks good. It looks good.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have picked out the Kissing Doves at all.
little cricket air assault wings.
Yeah, that I wondered about that. Yeah, cool.
Excellent. Well, we know that decorating is obviously a big component of the holidays. And as we saw, there's some unique aspects of decorating during the holidays, especially not only in garrison duty with learning how to sculpt ice, but also in the field. And one of the other components is receiving those care packages. And sometimes the care packages can be even considered a decoration because the boxes tend to be unique in their design and their pictures. And one great example of someone who documented those care packages and has a little bit of a story of decoration in their story is Ivan Schwartz. And Brittany, what can you tell us about Ivan?
Ivan Schwartz was born in Woodland, Wisconsin, and he was in the 4th Infantry Division, 8th Infantry Company D during World War II. From his photos, I would say he was very funny. These photographs are actually contraband. One of his fellow soldiers snuck a camera into the field, which is wildly not allowed. That's not okay. If somebody found that film, they could learn so much about where they were stationed, who they were, what did they have on them at any given moment. So this page is from his scrapbook, and it's of Christmas time in the Hurtgen Forest in 1944. And it's a strange contrast to me because you can see the big caption there, Christmas time, and they've got the packages there in a couple of the photographs. But then if you look, there's a little subtitle where it says, where Ed Spontenholtz lost a leg, stepped on a mine. So even with getting these Christmas packages, and you can see, if you advance the slides, you can see some of the faces they're making, and they're holding up their Christmas packages and they're so happy. But also that very harsh reality of they were in combat. This was not a safe space, but they made it as safe and merry as they could. And I think, Kevin, you said in one of his letters, he mentioned, even though they were in a forest, they found some pine boughs and pulled them into their trenches so they could kind of decorate and make it a little bit like Christmas.
Yeah, I love to think that in this photo, and then I think that's the next one too, which is the goofy photo, that pine bough there you see on the right hand side of the screen is one they brought in, but I'm not entirely sure. It might just be the tree around it. But either way, in his letter home he talks about it, and I think it's a lot of fun. And I like to also hope that on the back left there, if you notice, that sea rat can that's upside down on that pine bough is a ornament, but probably not. I love the box where you can see Merry Christmas written on it there. And then there's another photo, I think it's on the page, where they talk, it's all cigarettes.
Yeah.
Which is a very valuable commodity, not only for consumption, but also for trading. So there you go.
I think the other thing in looking at this as a vet is the understanding of how important those packages are in the field.
Mm-hmm. You're exactly right. Yeah.
I agree. And that's one of the stories I talked to Kevin about too. Like our airfield got blown up in December. And so they couldn't land. The DHL planes couldn't land to deliver all the packages, the care packages for Christmas. So in 2003, nobody in our area got their gift packages until the second week of January because of the big hole in the landing strip. So the DHL planes couldn't deliver those packages. And it was a really big bummer because then you had to find ways in which to share with each other what you have within your own possessions. And then in January, we had a huge Christmas when all of a sudden our cots were overflowing with packages from the delayed service from the DHL plane. So it is very meaningful to receive packages, and even the packages from strangers almost were even better than the ones from your family because people were so generous in giving.
I find it interesting that you had packages delivered by DHL, right?
Yeah.
God bless the DHL delivery
Yeah.
truck, because you hear stories in especially World War I and even in World War II where the Christmas packages are either holding up the supply line because they're trying to get the packages to the front lines, or they're delayed because ammunition has to go in first because they're using the supply lines that are the Army's supply lines versus in your case you had DHL flying them in.
Yeah, and then we would have to have volunteers to go help with those that were working in the postal services to stack boxes and divide them up.
Excellent. Well, I'm keeping an eye on time here, and for those that are joining us live, if you need to go for it. We're gonna just keep talking and sharing stories, so feel free to stick around, and as we go with the last couple stories that we've got here. But for those that are tuning in on YouTube afterwards, where this will be posted, hopefully you can stick with us to the end because there's some great decorations coming up here shortly. In fact, probably one of my favorite stories that you told me, Brittany. could you remind us of Petronsky?
Sure. Mark Petronsky was serving around the Vietnam War era, and this photograph was taken at Fort Hood. And he was a photographer, so his collection is really rich in just beautiful photography from where he was stationed, where he was serving. And this, I just have to read you what he wrote about it because I couldn't say it any better. This is one of those instances where a picture is worth 1,000 words. Words are scarcely adequate to describe this Christmas display, December 1971, courtesy of the 1st Cav. The 1st Cav had returned from Vietnam and replaced the 1st Armored Division, Old Ironsides. This greatly increased the number of helicopters that were busy flying around Fort Hood, and somebody got the bright idea to use one of them as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This is a Cobra attack helicopter with a cheery grin. I didn't see this display being set up. It appears the platform was rigged and the helicopter was flown into position on the platform. The platform is decorated with camouflage netting. Santa is in an M60 tank and was without a doubt the ugliest Santa I have ever seen in my life. The reindeer aren't much better. This display was set up just inside the main entrance of the base. I assume this was somebody's idea of how to display the holiday spirit, improve morale, and generate esprit de corps. It didn't have that effect on me. I was merely dumbfounded.
I won't lie, that Santa might be the stuff of nightmares. I'm not entirely sure.
That's hilarious.
Wow.
Sculpting's hard, people.
It is, but if I saw that coming down the chimney, I don't really know. I really.
You know, there's some poor soldier out there that's like telling everybody the story of how he got assigned to make Santa Claus in this big exhibit. I mean, you guys saw my ice sculptures. They're terrible.
You know, several people did their best and tried very hard.
Or they were forced to do it.
And in the rest of the photos, you can see cars with civilians and like little kids, and they're walking up and they're looking at it. So clearly this was an attraction. But you have to imagine just walking out one day and going, oh,
I guarantee you somebody was like, hey, you draw and paint? I bet you could sculpt a Santa for us.
Not that you're speaking from experience or anything, right, Yvette?
That's kind of how it goes, though. And everybody tells you how amazing it is, but they're all having the same thoughts. Like, what is this thing? Other than the Santa, though, I think that was a pretty spectacular display.
It was. I was impressed with the reindeer.
Yeah, the reindeer.
And that was one of our Christmas cards from the museum for many years. We have to remind everybody.
That is true. That is true. And Santa does arrive in whatever mode of transportation is readily available. In this case, a main battle tank, but that's okay. Yvette, actually, you got another story about decorations, right?
Yeah, it's something similar. I mean, I was the resident artist, so I was assigned to paint murals, and what I said earlier was pretty much right on. You paint murals, so you're going to make all the Christmas decorations for Christmas. And this was in Mosul in 2003. So this was the first Christmas of the Iraq War, and I was out there. By this point in the deployment, I had been assigned to local national Iraqi men to paint with me. And the mechanics had been assigned local nationals to work in their machine shop. So they were carpenters, and they lent them to me with my two painters and told me to get a list of supplies and prepare the drawings to create these decorations for the big Christmas parties. So this is my actual sergeant's notebook that, actually I wasn't a sergeant then, so it was my notebook that had the drawings in it. You can see the sand in the middle there. So I drew all these drawings, and we gathered some tools and woodwork, and we were starting to make this when I got word that I was allowed to take a mid-tour leave. So I don't know if you want me to keep talking about the decorations or talk about the mid-tour leave story. When I say
mid-tour leave, probably, yeah.
Yeah, so you can see this is Christmas. We had been in Iraq since March, and which meant we were prepping for redeployment within the next couple months. And in 2003, they didn't have the established mid-tour leave program yet. So in about July or August, they announced that some folks would be getting time to go home on leave. And most of the people gave up. There was only like 11 slots for the whole battalion at first. And most people gave up those slots to people that just had children or had big family moments they needed to go home for. And then slowly the slots started opening up and became available to people. And I gave up my slot, but then in around November, I started having really bad nightmares and I wasn't sleeping and had been pretty much to the level of exhaustion. So they found a slot for me and got me the opportunity to go home to get some rest. And I, by the luck of the draw of that timing, got me mid-tour leave, at which point my 2 weeks would be spent home. Christmas, New Year's, and my birthday is December 30th. So Christmas, New Year's, and my birthday in 03, I was allowed to go home. So they flew me home, and I surprised my mom and my family as a big Christmas present because I had already told them I wasn't allowed to go home. And so for Christmas, they had no idea I was coming. And they flew me home, and while I was home, I bought a battery operated tool set for the carpenter that I was working with because the electricity would go out so frequently in Iraq that he couldn't work as a tradesman in carpentry. So I bought him a battery operated Craftsman tool set and try to fit it in my duffel bag to get sent back to Iraq as a gift. So I never got to see the decorations come to fruition. I heard the Christmas party was pretty spectacular. One of our soldiers got a little carried away and fell off a four-wheeler and broke his shoulder. And so I returned to a unit that was on we were being punished and then found out about all the care packages. So I was happy to celebrate on Christmas and New Year's. I did get the well-needed rest that helped me finish the last 2 months. And I'm thankful because that was actually the last time I saw my mom alive. My mom died when I came back from Iraq. So it was the last time I saw my mom in person. So it was a really great Christmas gift.
That's really neat. And you were able to bring back a gift for someone, you said?
Yeah, for one of the local national, for one of the Iraqi men. And I had to get it approved because they would come and work on post with us and then they would get searched before they exited. So I had to go to the MPs and make sure that they knew he wasn't stealing tools from us because it could have got him fired and in a lot of trouble. So we had to make special arrangements for him to take the tools back with him.
So not like your tools at the museum where you have a YP etched in on them so that you know.
Actually, the YP etched in them are the tools that I brought back from Iraq because I had a tool library. While I was in Iraq, I would check out tools to people. So yeah, we made sure that he had his tools.
Good.
And then one of the other carpenters wanted carpentry magazines. So I think I got him this old magazines and brought him a stack of this old house magazines.
That's
so
excellent.
I brought back presents for my Iraqi local nationals, not for my because I knew all the care packages were coming. So
I was going to say you had quite the bountiful harvest there in January anyway, it sounds like.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Well, Luke, that actually is a good transition to a story that you have for us from Vietnam, right?
Yeah, I have the story of Harold Fritz, who is from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And he's a Medal of Honor recipient for his actions while in Vietnam. But in this case, I came across a story where he's talking about what happened at Christmas time in Vietnam. And we're going to go ahead and play that, and then I'll finish up. He gets cut off, and I'll finish the rest of his text because it tells the rest of the story.
Where most of the guys got a lot of things from home that we got over there, apples and oranges and other candies and that we could get access to. We had a village that we were in there that was half Catholic and half Buddhist. Now, don't ask me how it came up with that split, but that's what it was. And I got together with the village chiefs and told them that it was a tradition for Americans to give at Christmas time. What we'd like to do is bring some gifts over and food and that, items that they could use and present them to the villagers, but it has to be equally shared with the Buddhists and the Catholics. And so I went around with a trailer, we picked up everything that the guys had, and we set out security around the village. And I went into the village, and I had a Jeep in the trailer, my driver, and I was standing next to the Jeep, and all the villagers started coming towards it. It was a friendly village. Up to this point, it had been. and it was a little girl. This is out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we're in the Toolies now. And this little girl had this dress on. I'll never forget it. And her dad must have spent a fortune on this dress. And she was coming towards us. The crowd pushed in. She tripped and she fell down on the ground. And she got her dress soiled. So I went through the crowd. She was about from here to the door
over there, and I went and picked her up and put her on the hood of the Jeep and gave her a banana and apples and some other things. And her dad was so thankful that I was able to do that. It was just like I gave the little girl a brand new bicycle and I gave the father a brand new car. It was, it was just, James, seemed like nothing to you, but to them. Fritz replies, two people from different worlds coming together on a common holiday like that, just showing that we could share.
That's beautiful. That idea of crossing those divides, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. We've got a few more stories left. I know we're closing in on our hour here. So like I said before, we're going to keep going because I think we've only got a couple more to go. One of them, I think, if I remember correctly, the next one, if I can bring up my screen, is of a unique traveling service. And Luke, this is yours as well, right?
Yeah, this is the story of Earl Thayer, who's from Jefferson County. And I believe he's a combat engineer. And he's on the ship staging for the invasion of Leyte during World War II, and they're out in the harbor, and by his estimates, there's 500 ships, and he paints a picture of what happened.
Let's see, it was about Christmas time, I think. It seemed to me we left there, well, we were, on Christmas Eve. Christmas time, we were loading up. There must have been 500 ships in the Moritai and surrounding waters, because they were.
It died.
I don't know what happened there.
There we go.
Building up a huge flotilla of ships to take more troops into northern Luzon.
Okay.
The fight for Leyte was going okay, finally, which is a southernmost island in Philippines. But General Yamashita had about 80,000 or 90,000 troops in northern Luzon, north of Manila.
Okay.
And between Manila and the end of the northern Luzon, there was a town called Baguio, which is the summer capital of the Philippines. And they needed to get more troops in to go north instead of south and at Manila. And so these hundreds and hundreds of ships were out there, and nightly air raids, and it was still going on at that time on Moritai. And as those ships gathered, there was a lieutenant in our company who had he was from Salt Lake City, Utah, Mormon, and a wonderful tenor voice.
Oh.
And he collected 6 or 8 of us who liked to sing. And he got us in a boat, and he had a little portable organ that he could carry with him. And we got a small landing craft, and we went visiting boats on Christmas Eve all through the harbor.
Okay.
And we'd get aboard, and they'd say, anybody interested in a Christmas Eve service, come on over here. And we conducted those singing services with a prayer or two, because everybody knew they were going into combat.
Yeah.
And this guy's name was Monius Harlan, a wonderful man. And so we visited some 20 ships during the course of that night.
Oh, wow. Oh, man.
Way into the night, interrupted by several air raids, but it was still a deeply moving event in the sense of,
a great thing to do.
especially as you recollected it at the time. But what was startling was the deep silence of the men who we were visiting on those ships.
Oh, that's cool. I would hope with all those ships that there might be an oral history out there somewhere from somebody that was on one of those ships and remembers that visiting.
Yeah, we have I think I'd mixed Luzon and Leyte here, but we have another one. I don't have it with you, but where there is someone doing services from ship to ship, and he describes that on each ship.
Excellent. Oh, that's cool. That's neat. All right, I think we're closing on our last story of the day here. And of course, as we know, right, Russ, it wouldn't be a holiday without some sports.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of the holiday season, December and January, I think of the NFL wrapping up the season, heading into the playoffs. I think of endless bowl games, college football. Hopefully the Badgers are playing in the Rose Bowl. And I think this goes back quite a ways, this association of holidays in football. So I want to talk a little bit about a pretty unique event called the Spaghetti Bowl that happened during World War II. So the idea of playing football overseas was not unique to this event. Kevin, if you want to go to the next slide, you can see that there had been some earlier American football games with very creative names going on. Starting in '44, we had the Tea Bowl and the Coffee Bowl. The Potato Bowl played in Ireland. I don't know if that
wow.
Very sensitive, but there were some games in France as well, and I will not try to butcher that first one with my French pronunciation, but there was also the Riviera Bowl in Marseille in January 1945. So you can see sometimes these games pitted a nation against a nation, such as the US versus Canada in the Tea Bowl and the Coffee Bowl. Sometimes it pitted branches of service against each other. The Potato Bowl was Army versus Navy. And sometimes it would get down to the level of a particular unit, such as the bowl game in France, the 9th Air Force against the 1st General Hospital. But interestingly, we have two collections, two separate veterans who participated in some form in the Spaghetti Bowl, which was a game that was played on January 1st, 1945. In Florence, Italy. Now, at the time, the exact location of the game was kept secret for fear that the Germans might pull an air raid on it, but we know now that the game was played in a particular stadium, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But this is a really neat flyer from the game, and it came from the collections of these two folks here. So the first one is yep, so this is the flyer, super cool, I think, really colorful. Milton Sklansky is a veteran who grew up in Chicago, but later settled in the Racine area. And he was part of the special services throughout World War II. And by the time of the Spaghetti Bowl, he was with the 5th Army Special Services. He served on the 5th Army cheering squad. And you can see him holding the 5th Army logoed equipment right there.
Official U.S. Army issue.
Yeah, exactly. So his collection has a lot of photographs of the Spaghetti Bowl, which you'll see in a little bit. And then we also have materials from a female veteran named Eunice Onsrud, who was a WAC. She's from Stoughton, Wisconsin. She served in the 669th WAC headquarters platoon over in Italy, and she was chosen to be part of the 5th Army cheering squad as well. So that's her with the arrow. I'm fairly certain
that's him on the left.
On our left, on her right is Milton Sklansky. So they would have been interacting quite closely during this event. which I think is super cool. But she has also some photographs. She had the program that you saw, and we'll see a little bit more of in a little bit. And we do have an oral history interview with her as well, where she mentions the spaghetti bowl in passing. And I drew a little bit of information from that too. So super cool to have these Wisconsin connections. So as I was saying, the game we now know was played at the Stadio Giovanni Berta in Florence, Italy. This is a picture of it from the time of the Spaghetti Bowl. You can see the football yard lines painted in there. This is a soccer stadium, of course, since it's Europe. This stadium was the site of some World Cup games in 1934. After World War II, it would be the site of some Olympic soccer games in the 1960 Olympics. And it actually currently serves as the home of a professional Italian soccer team, Fiorentina. So it's still there. It has a different name now, but the stadium still is in existence. So on the next slide, we can see some of the buildup now to this game. We've got a crowd. According to Eunice Ansrud's oral history interview, she said there were about 15,000 people in the crowd watching this football game. On the next slide, we can see, just as we, especially those of us in Wisconsin, might associate with a football game, there were marching bands. Each of the services provided some musical entertainment during the game. It's a really cool photograph. There was even, on the next slide, halftime entertainment. This is Peggy Jean, who Eunice Ansrud described as a national baton twirler. I will be honest, I have never heard of Peggy Jean, and I did a little half-hearted internet searching for her, but wasn't able to find a lot on right now, but I'm sure she was very well known at the time, and everyone was very excited to see her twirl her baton at halftime with the band. So we've got some photographs. Oh no, first we've got the rosters. So this is really cool. This is the inside of the program cover that you saw earlier. You can see the rosters of the 5th Army and the 12th Air Force, and there are some Wisconsin connections in here as well. If you look on the 5th Army roster, there is a football player, number 18, Ed Nimai from Marquette University, and a little bit further down, number 22, Arthur Lemke. Below that, Wayne Wendt, number 23, was from Watertown, Wisconsin, which I think is super cool. And then over on the 12th Air Force side, I need to look into this a little more, but apparently there was a member of the Green Bay Packers who was playing for the 12th Air Force. We've got Bernard, number 70, Bernard Buckowitz. And I would love to find out how long he played with the Packers or that sort of thing, but that's another research project for another day. So that's the roster. You can see there are legitimate professional football players on these teams, from the Eagles, from the Packers. There are college football players from Notre Dame, from all these other colleges. So these were not just recreational football players. These were highly skilled football players on the field. The next slide starts showing us some pictures. Actually, in the bottom left there, you can see Peggy Jean twirls. So these are more pregame crowd images. I believe the next slide has some pictures of the actual football action. Milton Sklansky also has some photos on the field. You can see the old leather helmets. You can imagine that there were some bruised ears and bloody noses in this game. These are some pictures of John Moody, who was the star of the game. He scored 2 touchdowns. And again, I saw so many research projects coming out of looking into this. He was obviously an African-American football player. He was not allowed to play in the NFL because they did not allow African-Americans up till World War II and a little bit after. So really interesting case here, I think. But he was the star of the show. If you go to the next slide, I think it shows the final score. So John Moody scored 2 touchdowns. He had a rushing touchdown, and he also returned an interception 70 yards for a touchdown. and the Fifth Army won the game 20-0. This is Eunice Onsrud's program. She filled in the score herself, so this is her handwriting keeping track of the score during the game. And that's kind of the story of the Spaghetti Bowl, which I think is a pretty unique holiday story from World War II.
That's really cool. I was gonna just double back here quick, and if you notice, and you pointed this out, when all those games took place, like what around those time periods, you've got November, December, January. Looks like most of those took place in around the holiday season.
Yeah, I do notice that as well. So it kind of furthers the association with holidays in football.
Yeah, very cool. Well, that comes to the end of our stories for today. I thank you all for joining us, and I thank you those sticking it out with us live, and for those that are joining us after the fact on YouTube. Hopefully you've enjoyed these stories as well. I will make a shameless plug that we're always collecting. We're always looking for more. So if you happen to know of any stories yourself from within your family or from your own experiences in the service and you're a Wisconsin veteran, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear your side of your stories as well. Now, I did say that I would have one question for Eric. Question for you, sir, is shake presents or no shaking presents?
No, absolutely. You don't shake presents. You might break whatever's inside.
Very good call. Very good call.
And you have a broken present. And you probably guessed wrong anyway, right?
Unless it's a puzzle, and then you really could just mess it up.
I'm going to give you a box of broken glass.
I've gotten two of those over my lifetime. So
that's the puzzle, though. You try and put it back together.
Oh, you got to do it first, then you put it up in the box, then you shake it, and it gets all messed up, and then you. All right, I see.
Hey, Kevin, before we check off, can I just mention two things?
Of course.
Number one, don't forget to send and consider deployed troops care packages that we talked about. We still have many soldiers serving overseas, both in deployment zones and in service capacity in areas like Japan and Germany. So there are many websites you can go to find ways that you can share the holiday season. And it might be too late for them to get it for Christmas now, but maybe they'll have a happy January like I did. So please don't forget our troops overseas. And two, I just want to make a little note that today we're celebrating the holidays of veteran stories without Meg Jones. And I just want to say that she will be remembered for the stories about veterans. So
Indeed.
Here's to you, Meg.
It was a hard loss to hear about this morning, but she helped us tell those stories of the individuals and remember the people, that humanity behind what they were doing, that making history. So I appreciate that as well.
Thanks.
That, I thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed your time. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season wherever you may be. And since there's no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.